instructions.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to day 2 here. We're looking forward to an outstanding conversation, Unit 6 conversation. And it's always fun. Unit 6 is always fun. We've got some nice issues here today. My name is Tom Vance. I'm a professor at Kansas State University. And my fellow judges are...
My name is Tom Tinder, and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
I'm Steve Franzik, retired professor of political science from the U.S. Naval Academy.
And I want to ask you to introduce yourselves to the judges here. And I also want to thank Ms. Brown for going through with this, even though we're trying something new here, and it seems to be working well. So thank you so much, Ms. Brown. So we know, you know who we are. Who are all of you?
Good morning. I'm Gabe Collenbach, and we're all juniors at Easthampton High School.
Hi, my name is Grace Kane.
Hey, I'm Zach Olby.
Hi, I'm Sam Papadelis. This is our teacher, Miss Kelly Brown, and our mentor, Hannah Wazinski.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Thank you, Ms. Wazinski, as well. So here is the question. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Never in the history of this nation have so many people been arrested for the cause of freedom and human dignity. What lessons can be learned from the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama? What is civic engagement and what is its significance in American history? What responsibility, if any, do schools have to promote civic engagement?" You may begin when you are ready.
During the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, African Americans and their allies fought against discrimination with nonviolent protests to secure basic human rights. Birmingham, Alabama was the epicenter of racial violence during the 60s. Civil rights leaders learned from the freedom rides that peaceful protests met with grotesque violence forced the hand of the government. The Children's March was a strategic move to draw the attention of the nation to the racial hatred of the South.
In Birmingham, the 1963 Children's March called on the nation's conscience. The Children's March showed the world that people should not have to wait for basic human rights, that civil disobedience can be a form of civic engagement, and that young people bring energy and risk to a mass movement for change.
Civic engagement is working to make a difference in civic life. It can vary from simply following the law to political and military service to civil disobedience and even radical violence. Civic engagement has been the cornerstone of American social and political progress, as seen through the efforts of the Patriots during the American Revolution, the moral charge of the temperance movement during the Second Great Awakening, and the collective planting of victory gardens during the World Wars.
Such civic engagement produced major changes like women's suffrage in the past and promises even more in the future. Legal and extralegal actions by leaders like Susan B. Anthony and Alice Paul forced the President and Congress to support the 19th Amendment. Today, young Americans are protesting over climate change, as seen in the case Juliana v. U.S. and the Global Students' Climate Strike.
While the most memorable civic engagement is major movements like the Civil Rights Movement, everyday civic engagement like military service, teaching, joining voluntary associations, and helping our neighbors is more important to the vitality of our democracy. When Alexis de Tocqueville visited America in the mid-19th century, he was awestruck by the everyday civic engagement that made American democracy work.
Thank you very much. Outstanding opening statement, but we do have a few follow-up questions.
No, civic engagement, however, does not always create positive change, nor is it always virtuous. In the many years of Jim Crow, individuals saw their duty to the community as denying other people's rights. More recently, citizen-led Proposition 8 banned gay marriage in the state of California. While the courts found it unconstitutional in Perry v. Schwarzenegger, it serves as a prime example of civic engagement leading to the oppression of minority groups.
For a democracy to function, the people must take responsibility to carry forth key values and principles. Aristotle argued that a successful constitution needs both good laws and good men, virtuously engaged citizens. Accordingly, he saw education as central to a functioning polity, while framers like John Adams and Patrick Henry believed that religion inspired civic engagement. Today, secular education must take on responsibility to teach civic engagement.
Schools must teach the values of civic engagement, and students need opportunities to experience participation in civil society to understand its rewards. This requires both education and practice. A 2015 study of the We the People program found students who took the class were more likely to believe that it is their responsibility to be involved in their community. Yet a March 2020 study by the National Commission on Public Service found a severe lack of high-quality civic education for students across America. This commission argues for widespread adoption of national state-based best practices and cited civic education as an essential requirement for fostering a culture of service in America. Quote, when 22% of American adults cannot name any of the three branches of government, it is well past time for the country to take action. End quote. The report calls for federal investment in civic education and incorporation of service learning within schools. Massachusetts is leading the way in civic education with the 2018 civic education law, which provides a nonpartisan education of civics in 8th grade and the completion of a civics project in both 8th grade and high school. Thank you. We are ready for your questions.
Thank you. Timer, I'll ask you to add a few seconds on the end here for my judging error. Sorry about that. There was a long pause there, and that's my
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah,
Okay,
no worries.
Well, we're still going to have a great conversation. It was a great opening statement,
Of course.
and we have some follow-up questions.
Would you talk a little bit about the ways in which the Constitution either supports or thwarts civic engagement?
I think one way it supports it is through federalism. So we see with the Article 4 of the Constitution guarantees all states a Republican form of government, which means that which makes it a lot easier to engage civically, because it's a lot easier to engage with a close state government than a distant federal government. Recently, we've been able to meet with our state representative, Dan Carey, which has been, and he's talked to us about how he has office hours where people are able to meet with him, and it's a lot easier to interact with the state government than the federal government.
I think 100% the First Amendment. The First Amendment is the most important because it allows people to have that right to speak their mind and have that kind of voice to be able to say what they want in their government system. But we see this kind of oppression on this right given during the recent COVID-19 crisis, where a pastor in Florida had a religious service at the end of last month, and he was arrested for giving these services. But his plea to during his sentence was that his rights of the First Amendment were being violated.
I also think that the Constitution does support civic engagement because in the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments, it expands voting rights, and voting is one of the best and easiest way for most people to get involved with the government and be civically engaged.
Do those amendments also limit engagement?
I don't think they limit engagement at all. I think they have expanded the right to many groups of people, and I think that just shows like how hard people have fought for these rights and shows that everyone should make sure to practice them because of how important they are.
Are there any limits on engagement?
Yes, I think there is definitely limits on engagement. We see Kentucky passing voter ID laws for the upcoming fall elections, and I think that limits the ability for people to actually go out and have that exercise right to vote, because not many people have the ability to get those voter IDs.
Let's turn our attention to civil disobedience. Is civil disobedience always justified in a democracy?
I don't think it's always justified, but there are a lot of situations where it's justified. I think civil disobedience goes back to John Locke's idea of the social contract, where the government derives its power from consent of the people, and that if they violate the social contract, then people should have the right to break the laws because the government no longer is getting the consent, therefore they no longer have power. However, in situations where the government isn't violating the social contract, I don't think civil disobedience is justified.
To add on to Sam's point, I think in King's letter to Birmingham jail, we see his description of civil disobedience as a way of people breaking the laws to make the laws stronger. And by breaking these laws, people are allowing to have this public attention to these unjust laws. So civil disobedience is really important.
Let's go back to voting. Should we have mandatory or compulsory voting here in the United States? Why or why not?
I do not think we should have mandatory voting because I think that everyone has I think it kind of falls under like freedoms. Like we have the freedom to choose what we do. We have the freedom to choose what we say. So I think that we should be able to choose whether we should vote or not.
I think that that forcing people to vote is a violation of the First Amendment. I think that the First Amendment gives you the right of freedom of speech, and that includes the right to choose to not say anything, to not be involved. And also, I think instead of forcing people to vote, I think it's better for politicians to actually go out and give people reasons to vote, which we have been seeing happening a lot in the recent Democratic primaries.
I think instead of mandatory voting, we should actually have mandatory civic service. We see with Israel, 18 to 25-year-olds have a mandatory, some type of mandatory civic service, rather having being able to be in the military or helping out in the community. I think that would be an important part and actually increase civic life and moral responsibility in our country.
Recently, there's been a number of demonstrations against the COVID virus and quarantine. Do you think we're going to look back at this as a good example of civic engagement or not?
I think that it is a good example of civic engagement because as Martin Luther King said in his letter from Birmingham jail, that like sometimes people just can't wait anymore. And I think that a lot of these people protesting are people that are living paycheck to paycheck and they need something to happen so they can continue to support their families and keep their lives moving. So I believe that this is justified. It's their last idea that everything else they've tried didn't work. So they're working to try to fix their lives and keep themselves able to function.
I would have to disagree. I think that it's unnecessary to protest against these social distancing restrictions. I don't think in that situation the government has violated the social contract. And while there is an argument that these people are doing it so they can go back to work, the government has tried to compensated people who are working, who are out of work with the stimulus check as a way to keep people from losing their money.
Well, outstanding job, Massachusetts. I heard some things in both your prepared statement as well as in your follow-up responses that we haven't heard so far today. I like the fact that you broadened civic engagement out, especially in your opening remarks, to not just what protesting against the government, but also civic engagement in terms of helping further the cause of government. You gave the example of Victory Gardens, and that was a nice, really nice touch. I also love the fact that you're able to, on the fly, connect your arguments to philosophical and historical examples. I mean, that's really quite impressive. The response to civil disobedience was, I felt, pretty much spot on. And not only did you go back to Locke and social contract, which was outstanding, but then more specifically to the question, you reference Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, and which is an eloquent discussion of when civil disobedience is justified. And to put a cherry on top, you said what King did, and that is that it's actually, if you do it the right way, it's the ultimate respect for the law. I was super impressed from start to finish.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me add on my positive comments. I agree with everything that's said. That broad definition of civil engagement was very effectively presented. I like the idea also you brought some data in, some polling data. I thought that was good to strengthen your particular position in terms of civic education in the schools.
I'm disappointed that we didn't have more time. You did an outstanding job. Great story in your presentation with right on examples. You responded to all of our questions in a most impressive manner. Congratulations to you, and congratulations specifically to you and to your teachers for just a truly outstanding job, particularly during these extraordinary times.